So at a glance, natural language processing is an umbrella term for a suite of data processing tasks and algorithms designed for computers to derive and understand the patterns of our complicated language. So think about, when teaching a toddler a language, you're teaching them what nouns and verbs and qualifying words are, possessives, like things like that, those idiosyncrasies and rules of our language. We're essentially, natural language is the process of doing that, except we're building in those rules and telling a computer how to interpret them. So, it's the systemic breaking down of language into smaller chunks so that our machines can interpret them and, help with modeling and different tasks that we'll use them for. So the goal of NLP is to break down these complexities and idiosyncrasies of our language to help us better understand, summarize, and classify data that have free text and lacking structure. So most of the formal applications of NLP are done on more unstructured, disparate data sets that we typically don't come across in the business intelligence realm. While we live in a world with a lot more structured data, but still there are plenty of opportunities and methods that we can use to bring value from the existing text data that we do have. So this is all really important because 80% of the data that is generated, according to some IBM research published a few years ago, is text data. So yeah, think of that. In the BI realm, where we're typically working with spreadsheets, data warehouses, database tables, right? That world only accounts for a small subset of all data collected. And the vast majority that is often left untouched is indeed text data. And the reason that much of this data goes untouched from an analytics perspective is because it has often been difficult to determine the strategic value of looking into this data, and then also being able to justify the cost of exploring that data. But like I said, there are plenty within this 80%, there are plenty of opportunities for individuals with, skills in business intelligence to begin extracting relevant, valuable information that can help, drive value for the business, for stakeholders, and bringing into your analytics program. So things like customer feedback and product reviews, that's one example of what fits into this bottom 80% of the iceberg. Surveys and social media interactions, that is a massive amount of data that usually comes in a structured format with free text, highly subjective free text. And also things like phone calls, email interactions, chat interactions in a customer service function. All of those bring the insight of the relationship between companies and customers in a more candid, nuanced way. And all of that can come in as free text. And lastly, the more difficult data sources that usually come in a little bit less structured format that are in this cohort are documents and things like change logs, generic notes, the things that just sort of sit on your computer that you don't really know what to do with. So that's also technically in this text data cohort, but we do have a lot of areas that we could apply NLP in a BI context in this 80%. Also, natural language processing is all around us. It powers the technologies that we've become heavily reliant on in our personal and work lives. So one example is, for many, let's say Tableau users, right? You've probably come across an issue where you're trying to build a calculated field or write a piece of code and you're not quite sure what the bug is or what's wrong with it. So then you type a convoluted search into Google using some random keywords, and then somehow that Stack Overflow article pops to the top that answers your question exactly, even though you provided like 2 or 3 keywords. It's almost like it's reading your mind. That's NLP at work. It's taking and matching, those keywords that you're typing into the search bar to those searched by other users, and then bringing, the most popular content to the top. So that's one, and that's a very simplified overview of how that is working using NLP. Another is, things like Amazon Alexa, Apple Siri, those smart assistants and smartwatch services. That is also NLP. What's happening there is essentially, taking your voice, the language you're speaking, transcribing it into text data, and then interpreting and pulling apart that piece of text to look for the most important pieces of information. So For instance, if I were to ask my Apple Watch about the weather in my city, so if I were to say weather, Portland, Oregon, it would take the context of those two keywords used together to warrant a response or a query that would give me the answer. So that's how that typically works. And then one growing use case, and this is especially relevant if you've looked for a job or applied for a job in the last 5 or so years, is resume parsing software. So if you've ever uploaded your resume to apply for a job and you noticed after you upload it, it parses out all of the relevant information, that is natural language processing at work. It's extracting all of the most important themes or keywords that have been identified as important and putting it into a data structure for the end user to view and to sift through. So I know those don't always work super great, but that's just an example of NLP sort of in the wild. And so while NLP has traditionally lived in the scope of software engineering and data science, because it's become more accessible and there's been a demand to make it more accessible, there's also an increasing demand for business-facing analysts and developers to have a working knowledge of NLP and knowing how to leverage the outputs that make the lives of customers and non-technical users easier, and also helping continue innovate and add additional capabilities to the data tools and data products that we build. So in fact, due to the highly subjective nature of text analysis and their outputs and the quality control measures needed, they're actually, the analytics team is the ideal candidate for someone who can serve as the liaison between technical teams and business-facing non-technical stakeholders to help define and sort of control what is being measured, what type of NLP tasks are being performed, and what's going to be the best fit to give the end users insight that is also going to be the most efficient from an engineering perspective, and where to place that in the overall flow of data. So the analytics professional is at the middle of this Venn diagram, if you will. So in the wild, there are quite a plethora of different subdomains and domains where NLP can be applied, different problem spaces. So yeah, ultimately the problem that NLP helps solve is one of data volume and high subjectivity. So a few different areas where NLP could be applied using different classes of the business. Marketing, probably the most popular in terms of NLP being used for social media and brand monitoring analysis. So there are plenty of tools out there that use NLP to analyze Twitter, Instagram, Facebook comments that are coming in and doing things like sentiment analysis and keyword mining and helping build reporting capabilities there. Survey analysis is a very popular one. Oftentimes surveys, you'll have numeric scores to rate an experience or answer a question on a 1 to 10 scale. And oftentimes there's a free text field in those same data sets that a company that allowed the respondee to provide more context and a more candid response. Those are prime for doing NLP tasks on, because it can allow us to get the additional insight that in the story that's not told by a numeric score. So that's a very popular example of where NLP is being applied in practice. Product management is a growing space. So digital product management, right, where there's a lot of consumer and user feedback being collected, and also maybe you have like a help desk with like help desk tickets with different priorities. Oftentimes there's free text being collected there that help describe issues in more detail. That's also prime and good structured data for natural language processing. And then another popular, I'd say probably one of the oldest examples in the business realm is in customer service. So a lot of the more legacy enterprise natural language processing tools are designed for customer service and call centers, so that companies can understand what type of problems people are calling about just by looking and hearing the voice of the customer and then transcribing that to text. and then also monitoring the compliance of their employees. So that's a very popular use case in customer service. And really, it exists in every subdomain. These are just some of the more popular ones. So a few of breaking down the most important types of methods that for NLP in the business intelligence realm. I mean, there are plenty out there in the wild, but these are the three that you will come across the most and that are most applicable to the BI workflow in the BI realm. The first is data labeling. And essentially what data labeling is it's taking your data set and increasing the dimensionality, widening your data set by using NLP to add natural language outputs to widen your data set. So for instance, let's just say you have a survey data set where you have a free text response. You run it through a few NLP tasks. It'll add on the output of those NLP tasks. So like sentiment, it can append a record whether that piece of text is classified as negative, positive, or neutral, or extracting relevant keywords, right? It'll append and augment your data set and help with labeling. So then you have additional fields that you can bring into the reporting layer and expose for things like semantic filtering and give end users a little bit more functionality, as well as those who are procuring the data. The second type of task is classification. And so what classification is it's taking these free text records and it's assigning structure or a higher level grouping to them based on the type of words or the topic or theme of that piece of text. So for instance, right, if you have, let's just say you wanted to write a program that extracts all of the instances of product names or certain cities being mentioned, classification would be able to append your data set and classify your records by those different things. And then, with also similar to data labeling, expose that as a filter and give you a little bit more flexibility in how your data is structured. And it could also, this can be really helpful, especially if we have, highly subjective text records. This can help us put higher level classifications to more subjective, nuanced data points, and give it sort of a higher level grouping to help cut through larger quantities of data. And the last one is summarization. This is a growing use case in business intelligence. So while classification and data labeling typically deal with, in the data processing layer, summarization actually exists more in the consumption layer. And usually what this deals with is taking a data set or a data tool, and it's helping write a natural language summary or report using trends or generic themes in the data without having an analyst needing to write that themselves. So it's like an automation of basic report writing insights, and there's a lot of existing technologies out there that can help you do this without needing to learn how to code. So we're going to talk through that a little bit.